The restaurant had this inviting, intimate vibe, warm lighting, smooth jazz humming softly in the background, and shadows deep enough to hide a lifetime of secrets. Sabrina was perched by the window, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her wine glass. Across from her sat Jason, her new friend, though if she were being honest, he was starting to feel like more than that. His grin, casual yet brimming with confidence, sent her heart racing. Tonight, Jason had chosen this out-of-the-way spot, tucked in a quiet part of the city, ensuring they wouldn't bump into anyone familiar. Or so she thought. Sabrina had gone all out for this meeting, meticulously perfecting her makeup, checking every detail twice in the mirror before leaving the house. She knew the power of presenting herself flawlessly. When Jason excused himself to the restroom, Sabrina took a moment to adjust her hair, smoothing out a stray strand and carefully checking her lipstick for smudges. But as the minutes ticked by, she realized he was taking longer than expected. She brushed off the unease that crept in, chalking it up to nerves, though a faint chill whispered otherwise. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to reality. When she glanced down, her stomach dropped. It was Daniel, her husband. He wasn't supposed to call. He should have been at work. Clearing her throat, Sabrina plastered on a sweet tone as she answered, "Yes, honey?" Daniel's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it she couldn't quite pin down. "Where are you right now?" he asked. Sabrina felt a bead of sweat forming at her temple, though she managed a light laugh. "Oh, I'm on a date," she teased, her voice playfully airy. "Just kidding. I'm catching up with some old friends from the conservatory." There was a brief, unsettling silence. Then Daniel's reply came through, cold and deliberate. "Funny. Unfortunately, it's not a joke." "Turn around, Sabrina." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Frozen in place, she slowly twisted in her chair. In the dim glow of the restaurant, at a shadowed table near the back, sat Daniel. He gave her a slow, deliberate wave, his expression unreadable. Sabrina's throat went dry as panic seized her. Clutching the phone tightly, she whispered, "Daniel, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work?" "Change of plans," Daniel replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "I decided to grab a quick bite. Imagine my surprise when I spotted my wife here, looking cozy with another man." His words hit her like a slap, the calm delivery only making it worse. Sabrina's thoughts scrambled for an excuse. "Wait, what? You think I'm on a date?" she sputtered. "Look at you. You're sitting with that pretty woman over there. What about her?" Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's Lauren, Sabrina. My lawyer." The ground beneath her seemed to vanish. For a moment, Sabrina couldn't find the words, but she wasn't about to let Daniel or this Lauren woman have the upper hand. Gathering her composure, she took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and stood. Her heels clicked purposefully as she approached their table, her expression a mask of poise. Sliding into a seat across from them, she smiled politely. "Well, hello there," she said sweetly, nodding at Lauren. "Lauren, right?" Lauren returned the nod, her gaze steady and sharp. Sabrina wasted no time. Turning to Daniel, she spoke with a honeyed voice laced with challenge. "Honey, what's all this about? Why are you out having dinner with a lawyer? Did something serious happen that I don't know about?" Daniel leaned back, his smile faint and unreadable, his eyes flickering between Sabrina and Lauren. "Well, Sabrina," he began, his tone deliberate, "you could say I've found myself in a bit of an unfortunate predicament. Pretty embarrassing, really." He shook his head lightly, the hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Never thought I'd be here, sitting with my lawyer. But hey, here we are. I just hope I'm not getting fitted for a set of reindeer antlers this Christmas." Sabrina felt her face flush, but she forced a bright smile and let out a soft laugh. "That sounds awful, honey," she replied, turning her attention to Lauren. "What do you think, Lauren? Imagine if your husband, who claims to be working night shifts, was secretly keeping tabs on you instead. A bit paranoid, wouldn't you say?" Lauren's smile was smooth, her expression perfectly neutral. Her eyes, however, carried a knowing sharpness. "Oh, trust me, life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at us. That's exactly why I'm here, to help couples navigate moments like these. Sabrina let out a soft laugh, though her pulse quickened. So, a divorce lawyer, huh? She turned her gaze to Daniel, her smile unwavering. Daniel, I'd hate for you to jump to conclusions here. This is just dinner with an old friend. Nothing more. Her tone was calm, almost teasing, but Daniel wasn't biting. He took a slow sip from his glass, his eyes locked on her the entire time. Setting the glass down with deliberate care, he leaned forward slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. Sabrina, you know I'm a patient, level-headed man. I don't act on impulse. I prefer to weigh the facts before making any judgments. His voice dropped just enough to make Sabrina sit up straighter. So why don't you tell us about Jason? He continued, his tone calm but cutting. Is he just a friend? Or is there more to it? Sabrina didn't flinch, her practiced smile remaining firmly in place. Daniel, I've already explained this, she said smoothly. Jason's a colleague from the conservatory. He's an incredibly talented pianist. We ran into each other and decided to catch up here. This lovely spot seemed perfect for a conversation about music. She shrugged lightly, her voice breezy. You know how it is with creative types like us, musicians, artists. We're expressive people. That's all it is. Daniel raised an eyebrow, a small chuckle escaping his lips. Well, I'd hope his hands stick to the piano keys, wouldn't you? Sabrina let out a soft laugh, waving her hand dismissively. Lauren, she said with a playful smirk, maybe you should note how your client here enjoys stirring the pot. Honestly, Daniel, that's quite the bold insinuation. Lauren simply shrugged, her demeanor cool and composed as she observed the exchange. Daniel's smile thinned, but his eyes stayed sharp. So, Sabrina, he said slowly, his tone firm but controlled, you're telling us that you and Jason are just friends? No romantic entanglements? No. Extracurriculars? Sabrina glanced between Daniel and Lauren, her smile growing slightly sharper. Daniel, we're just friends. Nothing more. Unless, of course, she added with a light laugh, Lauren here considers a mutual love of music grounds for filing an infidelity claim. Lauren chuckled softly, shaking her head. Oh, I wouldn't go that far, she said, her smile polite but her gaze sharp. I think we can handle this without unnecessary theatrics. Daniel leaned back, clearly amused by the exchange. All right, honey, he said, his voice tinged with irony. But you know, I'd be curious to hear what Jason has to say about your friendly relationship. He crossed his arms, watching her closely. It'd be interesting to get his perspective. Sabrina didn't falter. Keeping her chin high and her tone steady, she replied, Of course, Daniel. Once Jason's back, I'm sure he'll set the record straight. Strange, though. He's been gone a while. She managed a small smile, though her fingers tightened around her wine glass. Daniel smirked, pulling out his phone and tapping on the screen. Actually, Sabrina, we don't need to wait for Jason. He might show up eventually, but I figured you'd prefer to hear from him now. He held the phone up slightly, his expression unreadable. Sabrina's stomach sank. Daniel pressed play, and the recording filled the space between them. Daniel's voice came through first. Hey man, that cute redhead over there, your friend? Jason's laugh was easy, a little too relaxed. You could say that, he replied. But what's it to you? Daniel's tone stayed casual, even light. I've always admired how some guys make it look so effortless to pick up women. Got any tips for a guy like me? Doesn't come as naturally. Jason's laugh deepened, smug and self-assured. Oh man, I don't know if you can teach it. Some of us are just born with it, you know? Daniel's voice shifted slightly, playful but pressing. So tell me, people say redheads are the hottest in bed. That true? You get anywhere with her? Jason didn't miss a beat. His laugh was low, almost proud. Oh, they're wild, all right. That one? Man, she does things. Sabrina's breath caught as the recording continued to play. Her carefully constructed defenses began to crumble, though she kept her face as neutral as possible. Lauren's expression tightened, her calm exterior faltering just slightly. Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting the recording hang in the air. The faint smirk on his face only added to Sabrina's mounting unease. Let's just say, if I'm not careful, she might wear me out. She's got more bounce than I can handle. Jason's voice carried a smugness that grated, even through the recording. There was a pause, then Daniel's calm response followed. Wow, lucky guy. Jason laughed again, clearly reveling in his own bravado. Lucky? Yeah, you could say that. Just hoping she doesn't completely drain me tonight, if you know what I mean. The recording ended with Daniel thanking Jason for the chat and wishing him luck. What Jason didn't know, however, was that Daniel had rigged the restroom door to stick, leaving him trapped for a while. A not-so-subtle lesson in respect. As the recording faded, the ambient hum of the restaurant seemed almost deafening. Sabrina's cheeks burned as her fingers gripped her glass tightly. Forcing herself to sit up straighter, she cleared her throat, desperately trying to maintain her composure. Lauren's gaze, sharp and unrelenting, moved from Daniel to Sabrina, observing every flicker of expression like a hawk. Daniel, on the other hand, sat back in his chair, wearing a look of calm amusement, waiting for her to speak. Well, Daniel, Sabrina began, her smile strained and her voice wavering. Jason was just, showing off. Men say all kinds of things when they think they're bonding. He was clearly joking around, trying to sound impressive. Daniel raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. Joking, huh? Pretty vivid joke, if you ask me. But go on, Sabrina. I'm listening. Sabrina straightened her back, her face still flushed. Daniel, really? She insisted, forcing a small laugh. Jason's just a blowhard. He loves to brag and exaggerate. Honestly, he's got a wild imagination. He probably thought he was being funny. Turning to Lauren, she tried to rally support. Lauren, come on, do we really take the ridiculous claims of a guy like Jason seriously? It's absurd. People say all kinds of nonsense. Lauren, however, wasn't swayed. Her lips curved into a tight smile, amusement flickering in her sharp eyes. I think I've seen enough for one evening, Sabrina. This isn't the sort of outing I'm used to, but I have to thank Daniel for inviting me. It's been enlightening, she said, giving Daniel a small nod. Sabrina's expression tightened, but before she could respond, she noticed Jason standing at the edge of the restaurant, scanning the tables with a frazzled, irritated look. Daniel leaned back with a polite tone. Looks like your friend's back, Sabrina. He seems eager to find you. Sabrina called out to Jason, her voice straining to sound cheerful. Jason stormed over, clearly flustered, oblivious to Daniel and Lauren at first. Sabrina, you won't believe this, he blurted. Some jerk jammed the restroom door. I was stuck in there forever. His eyes darted around before landing on Daniel. Narrowing his gaze, he snapped, It was you, wasn't it? What's your problem? Daniel simply raised an eyebrow, smiling faintly, while Sabrina shot Jason a pleading look. Jason, she said quickly, let me introduce you. This is Daniel, my husband. Her voice faltered as she continued. Why don't you go ahead and explain to him that you're just? But she never finished. Jason's face went pale as realization dawned. His mouth opened, then closed as sheer panic replaced his anger. Oh, crap, he stammered, his eyes wide. I think I just heard my phone ringing. Better go check on that. He gave an awkward nod, grabbed his belongings in a rush, and practically bolted out of the restaurant without a second glance. Sabrina stared after him, her expression a mix of shock and anger. Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. Well, Sabrina, he said, his tone dripping with irony, Jason might be good for some fun, but it looks like he's not much of a friend when things get tough. He glanced at Lauren, then back at Sabrina. Anyway, I think it's time to wrap this up, don't you? Lauren rose from her chair, gathering her things. Agreed, she said smoothly, giving Daniel an approving nod. Daniel stood as well, looking at Sabrina with a final, lingering gaze. Oh, and honey, he added with a faint smirk, you'll be covering dinner with Jason out of your own pocket. Sabrina's jaw tightened, but she forced a stiff nod, signaling for the waiter. She handed him her card with as much composure as she could muster, but when he tried to process it, he frowned and shook his head. Sorry, ma'am, the waiter said apologetically. It's not working. As Daniel and Lauren passed by her table on their way out, Sabrina called out, her voice tight with frustration. Daniel, my card isn't working. Did you do this? Are you seriously leaving me here like this? Daniel paused, turning back with a faintly amused expression. I didn't realize it would be a problem, Sabrina. I just assumed your friend would take care of it. Her voice dropped to a sharp hiss. Damn it, Daniel. You're really going to leave me here without any way to pay? His smile widened, a touch of condescension slipping through. Come on, Sabrina. You're nothing if not resourceful. I'm sure you'll figure something out. With that, he turned and walked out, Lauren following closely behind. As they exited, Lauren glanced at him, her voice low and professional. I'll have the papers finalized by tomorrow morning. Daniel nodded, exhaling slowly. Thanks, Lauren. He didn't look back, his focus now on getting home and finally stepping away from the wreckage of the evening. Back at the house, the weight of the day settled on Daniel like a heavy blanket. He moved through the room slowly, gathering a few essentials into a suitcase. The thought of packing up everything crossed his mind, but he dismissed it. Tomorrow would be soon enough. A few nights at his brother's place seemed like the escape he needed. Barely an hour later, the front door swung open with force. Sabrina stormed in, her face flushed with anger. Dropping her purse onto the table with a loud thud, she marched straight to him. Daniel, what the hell was that about? She demanded, her voice sharp and trembling. You just had to turn it into a public spectacle, didn't you? Bringing your lawyer, setting me up like that? Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Her words tumbled out, accompanied by wide, furious gestures. And leaving me there without a way to pay? They actually told me I'd have to wash dishes or clean toilets to cover the bill. Thank God Olivia came to help me out. Daniel let out a laugh. One of those tense, involuntary chuckles that bubbled up when he was stressed. It was a reflex, but it landed like a slap in the face to Sabrina. What's so funny? She snapped, her eyes narrowing. Daniel raised a hand, his voice measured but laced with bitterness. Sabrina, let me ask you something. What instrument do you play? Her brow furrowed in confusion. What? What does that have to do with anything? You know I play the flute, Daniel. He nodded, his lips curling into a sarcastic smile. Then maybe you should go find your pianist and play his skin flute. He gave her a mocking bow, his tone dripping with venom. It might suit you better. And while you're at it, leave me the hell alone. Sabrina's face turned crimson, her fists clenched at her sides. Daniel, you're unbelievable. Are you serious? You drag your lawyer to embarrass me, and now this? Do you want a divorce? Is that it? You're going to throw everything away because of some stupid comment Jason made? You're so damn petty. Her words hung in the air, but Daniel stood unmoved, his chest tightening. His voice softened, tinged with sadness. Sabrina, he said, I loved you once. And maybe, once upon a time, you loved me too. We were great together back then. But now... He shook his head, his expression hardening. Now, it's obvious this doesn't mean anything to you anymore. So yeah, I want a divorce, because my wife clearly has a thing for riding piano players. The sting of his words hit her like a slap. Sabrina's face twisted with anger as she grabbed her purse and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing him. Go to hell, Daniel, she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. Stop insulting me. I don't deserve this. Daniel's patience finally snapped. Slinging his sports bag over his shoulder, he shot her one last look, cold and detached. With a curt nod, he gave a mock bow, then turned and walked out the door, not saying another word. The next morning, Sabrina heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, Lauren stood there, a thick stack of papers in her hand. Her calm, professional demeanor was infuriating. Lauren held out the documents, her expression unreadable. Sabrina snatched them without a word, her jaw clenched tightly. She didn't even glance at the paperwork as she glared at Lauren. Watching that composed, unbothered face only fueled Sabrina's resolve. Losing was not in her nature, and this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sabrina prided herself on being sharp, clever enough to outmaneuver anything Daniel threw her way. The moment Lauren left, Sabrina sprang into action. By that afternoon, she'd hired one of the city's most reputable lawyers and begun preparing her defense. She had a clear strategy: paint Daniel as an insecure, overly suspicious husband. After all, she figured, he only had proof of a dinner with Jason, a colleague and fellow musician. His jealousy had simply spiraled out of control. But as the hours ticked by, a nagging thought wormed its way into her mind. How had Daniel known about her meeting with Jason? She had been meticulous, hadn't she? Careful not to leave a trail? Sabrina replayed every step in her head but found no answers. Unease coiled in her stomach, but she brushed it aside. Daniel was crafty, sure, but she was smarter. She'd win this. When the day of the trial arrived, Sabrina entered the courtroom with her head high. She felt confident, flanked by her lawyer, their narrative tightly constructed. Daniel, they planned to argue, was a controlling husband who couldn't handle a simple friendship. But as the proceedings began, cracks started to appear in her confidence. Daniel's lawyer presented evidence that Sabrina hadn't anticipated: intimate messages between her and Jason, pulled directly from her phone. Sabrina's face flushed red as she leaned over to her lawyer, whispering sharply, "He went through my phone? That's a complete violation of privacy." Her lawyer whispered back, but Sabrina barely registered the words. She was too busy staring at the damning screenshots. But Daniel wasn't done. His lawyer called their neighbor to the stand. The retired man, who lived directly across the street, testified he had seen Jason visiting Sabrina late at night while Daniel was working. Despite her lawyer's attempts to discredit him, the testimony landed. Piece by piece, Sabrina's carefully constructed defense unraveled. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear. Daniel had won. Sabrina sat frozen as the judge finalized the outcome. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Afterward, she caught Daniel in the courthouse hallway. Stepping in front of him, her voice softened, gentler than it had been in weeks. "Daniel, please," she said, her tone almost pleading. "Can we talk? Maybe it doesn't have to end like this. I made mistakes, but we had something special. Isn't there any way we can try again?" Daniel's face remained cold, his gaze steady. "Sabrina," he said, his voice even, "you didn't just make mistakes. You lied. Over and over. Even now, you're twisting the truth to suit yourself." He shook his head slowly. "I loved you. But trust? That's something I can't rebuild." Sabrina's lips trembled as Daniel turned to walk away. But just as he was about to step past her, she reached out and grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "There's something I need to know." Daniel turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "How did you know about Jason?" she asked, her tone laced with desperation. "You knew where to find us that night. You had those messages." "How?" "I covered my tracks." "I know I did." Daniel's expression shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but Sabrina caught it. His lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "You're not as clever as you think, Sabrina," he said quietly. "But you're right about one thing. I wouldn't have found out on my own." Sabrina blinked, her mind racing. "What are you saying?" Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "You should think about who your real enemies are," he said cryptically. Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving Sabrina rooted to the spot. The weight of his words sank in slowly. Her mind reeled. Who else would have wanted to expose her? Lauren? One of her so-called friends? Or Jason himself? Suddenly, her confidence felt hollow, her certainty shattered. The game she played had spiraled out of her control, and she was no longer sure who had been moving the pieces all along. As she stood there, the courthouse hallway around her buzzing with life, Sabrina realized that this wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Someone else had been pulling strings in the background. And if Daniel was right, they weren't finished with her yet. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel,